Hi, everyone. I'm Summer,
I'm Carrie.
and this is Hopelexia Podcast.
Join us to talk about sex, drugs, and self-improvement.
And I don't know, I can't remember if we discussed this before, Summer and Carrie, but one of the biggest contributing factors to the decline of our school system and schools being horrifically underfunded is that because the federal government, here's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, is a wonderful, wonderful thing, except the federal government does not reimburse for the money that is spent almost at all. It's like somewhere between 14 and 17 cents on the dollar is what the federal government reimburses the school districts who provide special education for their community. That's all they get. And the special ed funds are earmarked to go first because we have to take care of the kids with the disabilities first, which, that sounds like a great idea, except then the entire rest of the school system is suffering because, they're only getting paid back 17 cents on the dollar that they're spending, if that.
Well, and it depends on, the thing is like, everybody wants to say, well, IDEA needs to be fully funded. Well, fully funded means 40% of actual cost. And the funding percentage depends on who's the president, on who's in Congress. And like, there are some years you could look at, like the Obama years, they actually did some pretty good funding because all of a sudden, like when my kids were, my kids had gone through the Department of Rehab, and that's also part of, for kids with disabilities who are in high school or beyond. And like when my oldest son was in there, it was one administration, and they were just so tight on what that, they would hardly give my kid anything. The next kid comes in a couple of years later, administration changes, and then they're getting better. My last kid goes in there, and this was the same thing that was happening to a lot of the students during, this particular administration. They go in, they got a laptop, they got a printer for college, they got this, they got that, they got all kinds of really great stuff. Because one of my friends who was a special ed teacher was like, wow, they're giving them all this great stuff. And I says, well, yeah, because they're getting some money from the feds with this particular administration. They don't always get that. And when they don't get it, they don't have the money. And back to the school thing too, you have to look at, the primary source of funding for schools is the state. And I don't know what it is in California these days, but I remember getting really angry at
property taxes.
Well, property taxes, but there's an amount that the state spends on each child. I know at one point it was $8,000 a year. And this was a long time ago, because I remember my attorney had a big argument with the state of California because we had a mediation agreement through the agreement, my school district was supposed to pay for my son's tuition at this special school. And the tuition was probably like $13,000, which is really cheap, and they're getting $8,000 from the state. So really, and I don't know what they're going to get from the feds depending on the year. But the point is, it was a very inexpensive school, and they didn't pay it. And so we filed a complaint with the state of California Department of Education, and they found for the district. And it's like, the district didn't pay it. The district took the $8,000 from my kid and hasn't put it into this school. And that's okay. And eventually we filed a federal complaint, or we filed in federal court, and then they backtracked and we got the money.
Mm. That happens far too often. That if you involve some sort of state agency, that they will find in favor of whoever it is you're filing the complaint against, even though it's a clear violation of the law. They'll just be like, and move on, and just be like, sorry, they were in the right.
They're on the same side. That's the problem. It's like, that's why it's like, you got to bring in the feds, because the state will, And I mean, and it depends who's in charge. I think things are better now than they used to be. I mean, I can even tell you there's a massive difference in the way the kids are being treated at the school my kids went to than, as they are now, because I just went to an IEP there and it's like, oh, post-traumatic stress disorder. Here I am back in the same place. But the staff is much more amenable to what the kid needs, and they have much better understanding, because I was like blown away by their knowledge, because when I presented that kind of knowledge at my child's IEP, they all looked at me like I didn't know what I was talking about, and I had about 3 heads,
So why is it, sorry, I had a cough right there. Why is it so difficult to get an IEP based on conduct disorder? When we were trying to get one for my daughter, they literally told me we will not do it. The school would not approve it, which is not within, legally they can, because I quoted all the statutes and policies to them, but they said they would only do.
Sorry, did you say can or cannot?
They said they would not.
Yeah, but you said
they
could
should
or
be
could
able
not.
to.
Yeah,
They should be able to. But they would not. They said they would do a 504. And the reason the school told me was because conduct disorder is entirely behavioral. There's not a medical or anything, an accommodation. So she's choosing to act this way. So they would not do, which is technically true, yes, but they would not do an IEP based on that. We had to, in order to get her an IEP, we had to have a therapist diagnose her with ADHD in order to get an IEP, even though all of the accommodations were based on her conduct disorder issues, because
right.
She doesn't actually have ADHD. But why is it so hard to get an IEP for conduct disorder?
There's a couple things going on, because, if they were smart, they would be looking at the 13 categories of eligibility under federal law.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think that under the emotional disturbance, you should be able to find a subset. Like, if there's like depression or behaviors that are not related to a disability, that should be able to, you should be able to slide by, or other health impairment, which is, a lot of times ADHD falls under that, because they're looking for an explanation. As far as them not giving it to you, it's probably back to it just sounds like they've dug in their heels, and you have they're being obnoxious. I mean, I've dealt with, it depends on who your board of ed is and what your school policy and their culture. As I've learned from here is, depending on who's on your board of ed and who are your people in charge, they create the culture. Do they want to be a culture of help, or do they want to be a culture of obstruction? When I was dealing with my oldest 2 boys, it was definitely a culture of obstruction and delay and deny, and, and take you to court and waste all kinds of, for the consulting lawyer to make $750,000 every year on her contracts, versus when then the school board changed, a lot of those people in charge retired, culture changed, and then I was dealing with my daughter who had, different needs, but it was so much easier. They were so much better. I didn't have to always hire a lawyer. I could go into mediation, and I could get reimbursement for tutoring, or I could get some, I would say, how about if we split it? And they go, okay, we'll split it. I mean, I would just be happy with that, to get something, and I could get it at that time, versus before they would, they filed against me, I don't know how many times, to take me to court. So it's all about the culture of your school board, the culture of your school. I mean, you change the school board, you change the administration, you can change the culture.
So you said they filed on you to take you to court. Can you kind of tell us how that works? Because I don't really know how that process is.
Under the special education law, well, what happened was I did file a compliance complaint, which is when you complain to the state of California about I mean, I filed against them sometimes, but the worst one where we actually went to court was with my son with the autistic diagnosis, was because what happened was I wanted an independent assessment, and under the law they're supposed to give you an independent assessment, and I wrote them a letter and asked for it, and I got radio silence. And so they're supposed to let you know in 10 days, if they're going to do it or not do it, and give you a list of assessors to pick from. And I got radio silence. So, time's going by. So I went out and I paid for it myself. And at that time it was they're still very expensive, but at that time it was like close to $5,000. And that was a lot of money then, because it was 2004, I think. And so then that was a pretty airtight case. And she's the one who came up with the autistic spectrum disorder. And so then I filed a compliance complaint saying, hey, I asked for this. I didn't, nobody wrote me anything, and I mean, they finally did. When I did ask them, I did ask the school district directly for money. And the letter I got back was from one of their head psychologists that said, well, we did that other assessment and it's the same thing, so we don't have to pay. And it's like, no, your person said emotional disturbance, my person said autistic spectrum disorder. And even if they did say the same thing, it doesn't matter, because you guys blew your deadline. And so I think the state was actually going to fine for me. And when they realized that the only way they could stop the complaint is to file due process against me and take me to court to fight over it. And then on the first day of court, they acquiesced and agreed to give me the money.
Wow. I have on my blog, just for our audience, I wrote an article on conduct disorder and IEPs, and it takes you through, first of all, what the terminology and, which we like to call alphabet soup, because everything is, reduced down to acronyms, right? And explaining the process of getting an IEP, getting your child evaluated, giving, all of that stuff, all the notes on how to do that, the language that you use. I think there's some other stuff too in there. That actually is my most viewed page on my blog, is the conduct disorder and IEPs, because, I mean, it is really difficult to get them on there. And, where Robin works now, the Community Alliance for Special Education, that's the group that actually helped me put together the blog, and that was one of the lawyers. So we just discussed all the finer legal points and all of that stuff. Plus, there's a link to the case handbook at the bottom of the blog, and it's an amazing handbook. So anybody who might want that, you can just click on the thing, and then it will it'll take you there.
And there's sample letters in the appendix.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's great.
So when you were going through all of that, initially, how did you figure out how to go about doing all of that? Because I feel like most people don't know where to go when they can't get the IEP, or don't know what to do when they can't get what they need for the IEP, or do all of those kinds of things. I'm sure it's a little bit different in California versus Oklahoma, but
well, the federal law is universal.
Well, I mean, with the school, specifically, how did you know,
That's the problem. I mean, the internet became my best friend.
Mm-hmm.
Because I could look on, there's some really good special education websites. One is Rights Law with a W, WRIGHTS LAW. I mean, there's lots of great manuals and great informational articles in case law. Because sometimes you can find case law that's very similar to what you're going through with your own kid, because it's like nobody learns the same stuff repeats over and over again. And two, you always have to remember too, a lot of school personnel are just not up to date on case law, or they're not up to date on federal law. They're not up to date on anything. So you're the one that has to come in and say, article blah, 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 blah says this in federal law. This is one of the 13 disabilities. And this law says that. And you kind of have to, when you're writing things, you kind of have to throw those quotes in there so they know that you know more than they do. And, and a lot of people, I remember someone in an IEP said, some teacher says, what does federal law have to do with anything we're talking about?
Oh my God.
What does it not have to do with?
Wow.
I can't. So
That's crazy.
This is a teacher. She should know that federal law supersedes state law always. How do you? That's one of the things you are required to teach children in school. How do you not know that? My God.
I know. I remember when this parents telling me, I'm like, I think my jaw hit the floor and I could hardly even talk because it was the school my kids went to. This is
wow.
Yeah.
And and this woman thought she knew everything, and I mean, there's so much ignorance. In fact, sometimes when if you're trying to prove that your child isn't getting a good education, is sometimes get the teachers to email you, and they say the darndest things, and those are things that you can use in court. One teacher said to me about my daughter, because my daughter was having a hard time keeping up. She just had ADHD. She had severe executive functioning disorders, and she wouldn't remember to turn in her work, or it's just and I'd say, can she do it electronically? Because at least if I was with her at home, it's like if we did homework, I could at least email it to the teacher so my kid would get some credit, so it wouldn't be stuck in the backpack for the next 6 months. Or she would she'd just forget. She couldn't remember to turn it in, or she forgot she did it, or she and this woman said, if your daughter doesn't function that well, she has no right to be in a class in the general education class.
What? Oh my God.
She had the guts to say that in an email
in writing,
to you.
In writing. It's best in writing, because then I pulled that out at mediation and said, look what this teacher said.
If a teacher's willing to say that, I can't imagine what they're saying in the classroom to the child.
Classroom to any child.
Saying that to a parent and having the guts to say it in writing, what are you saying to that kid in private?
And this woman, I mean, she could, I tried to write back. I mean, I wanted to kill her, but I'm very diplomatic in my writing. I really am. I did not say anything offensive, but she said that, she wrote that I attacked her. She put this in a letter, that I attacked her and that she's going to let it go because she's a bigger person. And then she proceeded to go on with her diatribe. And then at back to school night or something, she sees me in the halls and she comes up to me and she says, if you let your child turn in her homework online, then you're not teaching her anything, because what do you think is going to happen when she goes to high school and she can't do that? And I turned to her and said, my son is currently in a high school and all assignments are turned in online. All assignments are kept the track of online. Everybody knows when it's in and when it's out, and there are deadlines. So they do everything online. That school is technologically advanced. And she just oh.
I bet that felt really good to say it to her, though.
Right.
I mean, they need to give children access to their education, right? And not throw up unnecessary barriers, right? At every single, juncture. It's just.
There's no good answer.
No. I mean, I guess you could say that about everything that we're discussing, right? There's what's the least worst option, I guess, maybe, or.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And to be sure you never miss an upload, make sure you turn your notifications on. And please come join us on social media so we can continue these conversations in between episodes. You'll find us at Hypoxia Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.